But if we can accomplish those two, clean environment and a low stress environment, for the most part, we were able to completely eliminate nursery scour.
Hello, everyone. I'm Laura Greiner, your host for today's Swine It podcast. And with me today, I have Dr. Christine Mainquist-Whigham, who is the Director of Health at Hill & Family Farms. How are you today, Christine?
Great. Thank you for having me.
Oh, we're glad to have you on today. Christine, some of our audience may not be familiar with you. And so before we start talking about our topic, maybe do a brief introduction about yourself.
Sure. Yeah. So I veterinarian with Hill & Family Farms and DNA genetics. I've been here for about 7 years. We're based out of Columbus, Nebraska, but I'm originally from Southwest Iowa. So grew up with crop farming and a cow-calf operation. Not a ton of swine experience or swine background. And then really became, introduced to modern swine production during vet school. Loved the epidemiology, the herd health, and the people, and was hooked from that point on, and so switched to swine exclusive, and then right after went to Iowa State right after graduation, started with Hill & Family Farms. So it's been a great learning experience and a growth experience, and have really enjoyed my time here with Pillin and now with DNA genetics.
Mm-hmm. Well, wonderful. Well, we're certainly glad to have you on today, and I think this will be a good conversation. We've talked a couple of different times over the probably 6 to 8 months with different groups on their perspective of what's happening in the nursery, and particularly nursery diarrhea. And I know we've talked to some nutritionists and others, and I'd like to kind of hear from your aspect, especially when you think about your work with DNA and Hill & Family Farms and kind of that nucleus and that conversation around it. Mm-hmm. And so maybe let's start with just some generalities about what are you seeing today in terms of nursery diarrhea?
Yeah, so it is unique. You get to see your commercial pig, and that's probably where most of the discussion today will be, but then also getting to see the purebreds and how they respond to their environments and the disease aspects there. So you've got some really high health, clean animals all the way down to your, traditional, maybe we've got a PRRS challenge flow. So a wide array of health statuses. But one area we really like to think about and focus on is how can we control pathogens? How do we manage that pig regardless of health status? So this has been a project that we've been working on for the past 5 or 6 years, is that, I'm talking specifically probably that early nursery scour. How do we impact that, and how do we make a change? So the approach that we've taken is, let's be systematic about interventions, and let's document and record those interventions and the outcomes, so we can continue to build on improving our health status. So diagnostically, a lot of the early scour that we would see would be rotavirus, and it'd be a mix of A, B, and C. Really no patterns, but very consistently rotavirus scour. Occasionally an E. coli, and hemolytic E. coli would be part of that. And so a lot of our interventions were targeted at scour, and really through the whole process of peeling back everything that we'd been treating pigs with and the rations we'd been feeding, and saying, okay, let's build it back up and see what we can do incrementally to make a difference. We were able to kind of define different areas that we were failing from the management side or the health side, to control this early scour. Mm-hmm. So probably the biggest thing that we focus on is sanitation and reducing stress. So that could be, stress around weaning, stress from the environment, stress from production practices that we have in place. But if we can accomplish those two, clean environment and a low stress environment, for the most part, we were able to completely eliminate nursery scour.
So that's actually very interesting. And before I kind of jump into a few questions about exactly what you're doing, you're defining early scour as something that occurs within the first week after weaning, or is it a different timeline than that?
Yeah. First 7 to 10 days. Yep.
Okay, so one of the first things I'm going to ask, because of course, as a nutritionist, you're always a little bit curious. We've always had these conversations around how often we should be feeding that pig when the pig first arrives. And when we think about minimizing stress, do you find that there's different responses to the pig based on the number of feedings a day? Or is it more just, no, we just need food in them, no matter how you get it in, just get it in?
Yeah. So we absolutely big believers in that early gruel feeding and getting pigs up and making sure that they know where feed is. And honestly, for us, it starts prior to weaning. Creep feeding the 7 days prior to weaning, just getting that pig exposed to solid feed rather than mom's milk. We've been able to document a decreased percentage of pigs that lose weight that first 10 days placed in the nursery if they were creep fed that 7 days prior to weaning. So that's a non-negotiable for us. And then that early creep diet it'd be our early weaning diet. That would also be the same, starter pig diet for sick pen or small pigs in the nursery. So high lactose content.
Mm-hmm. So I'm curious on that creep feeding in the sow farm. Is that, again, a specialized early pig diet, or is it rolled oats, or is it, sow feed on a mat? Because again, we have so many conversations around that, and, obviously medication's off the table because we don't want mom to be exposed. But, is there a certain combination that you found is to be successful in that?
Yeah, it would be solely our unmedicated early weaning diet that we use for creep feed. So we did have to make some infrastructure changes to accomplish that. So put in, small 2-ton bins on some of our larger sites, and just managing that and managing biosecurity of getting that different diet in can be a little bit tricky. But that's where we've really seen the benefit of the post-weaning success, is using that early weaning starter diet rather than sow feed or any other type of feed that we'd have on a sow farm.
Perfect. The other thing I heard you say was gruel feeding, and it made me think back to our old PED days when we were early weaning pigs and everybody got gruel feed. Is that what you're saying there? Is that everybody gets gruel feed, or is it still kind of the lower 10% get the special feed?
The lower 10%. So we'd sort our first smalls and then have, kind of our fallback or sick pens. And those are where we really target the gruel feeding. And it's a constant struggle to accomplish that correctly. You don't want to mix too much. You don't want the consistency to be off. And you don't want gruel sitting there for 2 hours and spoiling, and then you end up with pigs eating bad feed. So a lot of that is training and execution, and our nutrition team is heavily involved in that protocol. But we find that getting that pig up, and whether that's going in the pen to walk pigs or doing the gruel feeding, but just that early attention and that early care, those first few days, makes a huge difference whether or not they find feed or not.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, very good. And I found that too, right? The more often we get them up, or at least if we get them up multiple times a day, that certainly sets them up better.
And it's not like it's a ton.
Oh, no. Right. I don't think it is.
Yeah, it's not a ton of work. It's just being present, popping into the pens. It's not super stressful for those pigs, but it's hey, I can't just lay here all day. So, it's not like it's a ton of extra time for our team members to do that. It's just actually going in and getting them up.
Yep. Stirring the pen, right? So one of the other things you mentioned there, you talked, of course, about minimizing stress, and the other piece that comes into my mind is vaccinations.
Yes.
And so it's so common for us to vaccinate either while they're on the sow the day before weaning, or they walk in the barn and we might put something in the water and we might be injecting. Do you change that approach when you're talking about minimizing stress, or do you try other ways to mitigate that inflammation response when we vaccinate?
Yeah, so absolutely. Actually, that's one of the main changes that we implemented. We were on a traditional program, so they were getting their first dose at weaning, second dose 3 weeks later. And we noticed that 3 weeks later dose, we'd come in, you crowd them, they get stressed, and then they're seeing that, that secondary response and that immune response is so much greater with that booster dose. They were going off feed. And we'd sometimes even have, a parasuis break or an E. coli break surrounding that event because they're stressed. Those rooms get hot and humid. It's just a lot going on. So we looked at what can we do differently? What can we change there? And, we'd love to reduce labor. We'd love to reduce stress. So we looked for another time. We're already picking the pigs up that we can vaccinate. And that the option for us was that early pig vaccination program. So we give their first dose at 3 days of age. The second dose we give the day prior to weaning because they still get about 24 hours on mom to kind of recover from that. And then by the time weaning day's here, they're not completely stressed from vaccination. They're not going to get re-picked up and reshot once they arrive in the nursery. And then once they're placed, no other vaccinations are given in the nursery. So all they have to do is eat, drink, sleep, and grow.
Yeah, perfect.
Yeah, to accomplish that, though, we did a lot of testing. We were worried about some maternal antibody interference with the vaccines we were giving. So did some preliminary work there just to make sure that wasn't going to be an issue. Focused a lot on gilt immunity. And have successfully been doing that for about 4 years.
That's very good. That's actually really good to hear, because that is one of our biggest challenges, I think, is when we bring them in and we stress them right away with vaccines on top of everything else.
Yeah, we estimated based on, we tried to do some side-by-sides of barns. We had about 200 barns on trial for each treatment, and it was around 0.75% mortality difference by moving that shot to the 3 day and 3 week versus the 3 week and 6 week.
Mm-hmm. And when you're talking about that shot, so just for our audience, for clarification, we're talking about the mycoplasma or mycoplasma PCV2, or which pathogens?
Yeah, if we were giving a combo of PCV2, mycoplasma, and Lawsonia injectable.
Okay. Yep. So then my next question for you, because I know you always hear it on the opposite end, is if you give it that early, did you have issues with breakthrough in the finisher? Because while it might be good to start them well, it might cost me in the end.
Yeah. We have not. So, and that's part of our maintenance program is anytime we submit tissues, we're doing PCV2 surveillance. We're pretty much mycoplasma negative. So that one hasn't been as big of a concern. But also no ileitis breakthroughs. So that finishing diagnostic piece is part of the compliance program.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, that's perfect. The other piece to stress that I think about in this process is transportation.
Okay.
And I don't know the distance from your barns to your farthest nursery, but do you manage that transportation differently? Do you account for that when you bring those pigs in? Can you talk to me a little bit about how you handle transportation?
Yeah, so most of our sites, the pigs are probably going to ride anywhere from 45 minutes to an hour, but we'd have some they're going to be on a truck for 5 or 6 hours. So we're lucky we've got a great transportation team that ensures the trailer is set up correctly. The drivers are very engaged. But at the barn itself, we want that environment ready to go for the pig. So we don't want them walking into a cold barn. They're going to have to expend energy to warm up. And, we want it to be as great of an environment on arrival as possible. So our traditional nurseries where we've got plastic floors and, they're really set up to receive pigs. It can be easier. If we're going into a weed to finish site or concrete floor or wire floor nursery, it could be a little bit more challenging, but a lot of that is coaching our teams and, making sure that protocol is in place to be set up to receive pigs. And I think some of the technology we've invested in has given us some good insight into pig behavior and pig comfort level post weaning. And it's been really good to have that visibility to see how pigs are starting, what the pig behavior is, to get buy-in on controlling that environment post weaning.
When you say technology, could you expand on that a little bit?
Yeah, we're pretty lucky to have some forward thinking. We like to be, we say cutting edge, not bleeding edge, but made the investment to put cameras in our nursery rooms. So we'd have a camera at the front of the room. You can see almost all of the pens, and we've used it a lot to observe laying patterns. And from those laying patterns, helping to observe airflow and what's going on in the room. So we've been able to change how a nursery room's set up. Min vent settings have changed dramatically. Inlet settings have changed dramatically. How we stock pens, where we put sick pens, all of that, because we had these cameras in place and we had the people dedicated to sit there and watch them at all hours of the day. We changed our curves, we changed everything based on those observations.
Yeah. And maybe you can't, but I'm curious if you can quantify how much that's impacted your nursery, the mortality, the growth rates, if there's anything there that can maybe help producers that are considering this, but just aren't quite sure if the economics are there for those cameras.
Yeah. That was such a gradual process. We can't assign an ROI directly to the implementation piece. And I don't think it's necessary to have a camera in every single room. But as a learning tool to realize where the gaps are, I honestly can't remember exactly what the camera costs or what we had to hardwire them in, and we'd have some equipment in the office, but it was really fairly easy once we had it set up. And most of them were set up around our, we call them critical control points, but biosecurity areas. So that it was really just an expansion of the cameras we had around the biosecurity risk areas. So building that infrastructure wasn't as difficult. But I think that the investment and the return comes from how you use that information and what you can impact on the farm. So, we used it. We realized we needed to bubble wrap inlets. We needed to put weather stripping around doors. We changed our gruel feeders to a different style of gruel feeder. It's really basic things, basic changes. And all those changes, reducing the stress, increasing the sanitation, that ROI is, we don't have to medicate our nurseries. We don't have an extra 4, 5, 6% death loss. So that we can quantify, but yeah, I don't have the exact numbers on the cameras.
Oh, that's fine. I still think it's just fascinating. The things that you've been able to observe and then make changes on is really actually quite interesting to me. So I agree. Anytime we have the opportunity to let the pig tell the story, it's, we're better off for it. So yeah, that's very intriguing. So you've mentioned the word sanitation a couple of times, and I haven't forgotten about it. So let's kind of jump into it. So we talked a little bit about having a warm, clean environment, and concrete takes a couple of days to warm. So we know we want to have a dry area, but what else can we do in terms of sanitation to have that barn ready for those pigs?
Yeah, so I think where the thought process started for us was when we've got a brand new barn or a site that we've formaldehyded. It seems like that very first group through, fantastic performance. And then you get subsequent groups through and the performance just seems to drop a little bit, even if it's the same health status or the same flow of pigs. And so we realized, okay, that's a sanitation piece. What should we do differently? And we thought we were doing a good job. We're, hot water power washing and disinfecting. There's a day down to dry and you put a new group of pigs in. But you walk in and you feel on the floor, and the floors felt like grimy or slimy. And I remember one meeting, an analogy I used was, you wouldn't eat food off of dishes that you rinse with cold water. You want to use soap and hot water, and you want to scrub them, and you want them dry before you eat again. And they're like, well, so where's the soap? So we started looking at different detergents, and we found that application with an alkaline detergent. So we foam it on through a power washer, let it sit for about 20 minutes, and then come in and actually hot water power wash after that. It was unbelievable. We saw a 1.15% decrease in mortality just with application of this detergent. It was just unbelievable. It was, I don't know, like 2 cents per pig or something to do it. And then you ask the power wash crews, hey, what do you think about this product? And, they don't see the pigs, so they don't really care about the pigs, but they're like, yeah, we won't power wash without it. It makes things go so much faster. So that was extremely simple, and we saw a huge, huge payback on that.
Mm-hmm. So before you do the detergent, if you will, do you do a pre-soak on the barn, or does the detergent go on first as the barn is dry?
Yeah, most will do a little bit of a pre-soak, trying to be conscious without, how much water we're using, but we wouldn't go into a dry barn and apply detergent. So we do that in the nursery. Honestly, our farrowing does it too. A little bit of a pre-soak, maybe knock down some of the big pieces of manure, and then apply that detergent.
Probably is a little bit more reactive too, right? It'd be like me putting dry dish soap on a dry plate, or dish soap on a dry plate.
Right.
Doesn't smear very easily to get it to work. And so same analogy
exactly.
here. I'll use it one more time. So my other question to that, though, is when you go back and not the detergent, but the actual disinfectants, do you ever rotate your disinfectants in your barn programs?
We talked about it. Couldn't find great data on efficacy or need for disinfectant rotation. So we pretty much just stuck with one. So, potentially that's an area we could look at, but, we choose the one we use for efficacy and cost.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, and that's fair. Some people I know rotate them, and I think, again, it just depends on the diseases that you're dealing with and the pressures that are in the barn. My other question around that, and it's a piece that we don't think often about, but I put it in the sanitation list for me at least, are the water lines. So what are you doing to prep those water lines before pigs come in?
So some of it is being conscious about what we run through the water lines to start with. We do occasional water quality analysis, first of all, just to make sure we're running what we say we're running. But then we really try to limit the amount of, organic material that we would run through there, or carbohydrates, anything that bacteria would thrive on. So we're not going to be running any of that through the water line. So I do think that helps. We also limit the amount of medications and everything that we run through the water lines too. So trying to just maintain health that way preventatively. And then if we do see an issue, so if something comes up, maybe it's a hemolytic E. coli, or water lines getting plugged for some reason, we would implement a water line cleaning at that point. We've not seen a return doing a water line cleaning on every nursery turn. So I think for us, probably the jury's still out on proper efficacy, or frequency, and then what the efficacy is based on that frequency.
Mm-hmm. Well, I think you bring up a very good point. You start with a program where you don't run things through the water lines, so we reduce the chance for biofilms and so forth. But if they are going to do that, then it might be necessary to do a routine waterline flush with something prior to those pigs coming in, just to break down that biofilm. And so, as you indicate, management's going to be a big piece as to some of these decisions that you're making today.
Yep. And then I think just remembering to continually have that conversation, because if we do need to run something, it's a lot easier to do it when pigs aren't in the barn. So you kind of have that on the nursery. We've got, once every 6 or 7 weeks to do something. And if you load it back up and you miss it, then you're out another 6 or 7 weeks. So communication and somebody keeping track of it is a big deal.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, very good. Well, Christine, I see our time is kind of wrapping up, and I've actually had a really good conversation with you. I've enjoyed talking about the ways to set that barn up and reduce the stress on the baby pigs. And before we jump into those infamous questions that we ask our guest speakers, maybe just send a couple of takeaways or key points you'd like our audience to have today.
Yeah, that time sure flew. Mm-hmm. So I think for us, like our culture and our core belief really is letting that pig tell you what it needs. So being able to read the pig, and usually the pig's needs are warm, dry, draft-free, and a low-stress, clean environment. If we can do those basics right, diseases may come in, we may have some stressors there, but we cannot ignore just meeting those pigs' basic needs and listening to what it's telling us that it needs.
Mm-hmm. Fantastic. That's a great summary and good take home for our listeners.
It's time for our famous 3.
Curious to discover if you can manage your animal data and team's work with the touch of a finger? Some of the best and largest pig farm holdings worldwide use cloud farms to collect and analyze data like never before. How? With the most advanced mobile app to collect data accurately and super fast. For breeding, farrowing, weaning, and finishing. Also, this is the easiest way to assign tasks to your team and motivate to work more efficiently. You instantly understand what gets done on time and what doesn't. So yes, you can manage your animal data with the touch of a finger.
An animal nutrition technology company offering innovative products and new applications for the swine industry. The combination of AB Vista enzymes, technical services, and nutrition expertise provides the industry with new opportunities to further improve production efficiencies. Fiber is receiving renewed interest due to its influence on the microbiome, and AB Vista has brought together research experts to discuss the industry's knowledge of fiber functionality and to introduce a Stimbiotic, targeted to improve fiber digestion. To request access, contact NAM at abvista.com. That's NAM at abvista.com.
Well, as we wrap up for today, as I mentioned, we're going to ask you a couple of questions. The first one I'm going to ask you is, do you have a swine resource that you recommend to our listeners today?
So I'm going to put a plug in. I'm on our AASV early career committee, and one of the resources that committee has developed is it's a bank of experts, subject matter experts. So I love looking up a good research paper just as much as anybody else does, but I think having that human connection and somebody to reach out to is a big deal. So we do have that list of subject matter experts. If you've got a question on anything, being able to reach out to them and learn more, I think is really powerful.
Mm-hmm. Very good. That's a good resource. I've not heard that one lately, and that's actually a very good resource for everybody. How about something that's not related to pigs? Is there a book that you've read recently or that you are reading that you'd recommend to our listeners?
So I'll probably alienate about or maybe over half of the people listening, but I'm a new mom. So my days are spent reading, books on like how to survive this transition to motherhood. And I've really enjoyed the taking care of babies resource. So it's saved my sanity and having a kid that sleeps 12 hours a night allows me to get up and do what I do every day. So if you haven't heard of that one and you're going through the same stuff, that's been a lifesaver.
Absolutely. I think any new mom would take a 12-hour night of sleep. Well, my last question for you is, if you can think of someone in your life that you have defined as successful, what's a trait that they possess that's allowed them to be successful?
Yeah, I really, so I see there's one person that I'm thinking of, and he always, sticks to his core beliefs and doesn't deviate from the things that he, kind of like the truths that you hold to be the most important. So I think, just being true to yourself and not deviating from that, then you're always consistent when you work with others. People know what to expect with you, and you can go to bed every night knowing that, you stuck to your guns. And I think personally for me, having that approach to life, to family, to work, it helps guide you in your decision making.
Mm-hmm. Absolutely. I think that's a great one to have. Well, Christine, I do want to thank you again for your time today. It's been a pleasure visiting with you. For our audience, again, this is Dr. Christine Mainquist-Whigham, and she is with Pillen Farms. Christine, thank you so much for your time today.
Yeah, thank you for having me. This has been really fun.
Imagine if, with a few key concepts, you could have the potential to create a massive positive impact by bringing from hundreds of thousands to millions of dollars for swine producers. Join us on this small group and go to the next level of swine nutrition on this 7-week-long elite online training in applied swine nutrition and feeding by myself and my world-class invited speakers. Additionally, you enjoy an exclusive community to exchange ideas. Go now to www.eliteswinenutritionist.com.